Stefano's Ableton session is completely blank, and we're going to sort of start from scratch, really. So again, proving that you don't necessarily always have to have lots of other pieces of equipment to get a great result. So with quite a modest setup, you can still kind of make tracks which are ready for the dance floor and for beyond. So great. Yeah, so should we maybe start sort of without further ado?
So yeah, I normally start with beats. I think most of us start with beats. Some producers are very good in starting with chord progressions and melodies. It's useful sometimes to switch things around, but I normally start with beats. And already within the beat making, I think that there are a couple of tricks that I use all the time to generate some quick results, because I think it's very exciting to. I don't know if it's the same for you guys, but it's very exciting to have an empty project. And then put down beats and stuff, but then after a while it can get boring real quickly, especially within 1-2 bars loop, which we end up hating by the day after. So I will just very quickly put down some drums, starting with the kick, so we have an idea of tempo. At the moment at 117, which is my favorite tempo to start. And I'm just gonna put down some sounds very quickly. So starting from something like this, very, very simple. I just remove now, I'm using Ableton, which has these nice drum racks, which is a collection of sounds. And so the first thing I do is I remove the sounds from where they are, because I want to have full control over what I'm doing. So I just have a look at what sounds are playing, and I remove them from the group by doing the extract chain. Let's see, hi-hat, toms. There we go. So now we've got our, I'm just going to name them quickly. There we go. Hats. Tom.
So you're basically, for those that can't see, so the little variations of clips basically on this particular session view. So you're really sort of having each individual drum sound has kind of got its own track effectively, isn't it?
Yeah, so basically now, very quickly, I've divided the track. So now we have the MIDI available for all of them. And what I do, the first thing I do normally when I write a beat, I try to make immediately some variations. Again, because it's kind of like, you just started, you have like the whole, you think, oh, maybe this is good. So you're kind of excited. So very quickly, I make 2 copies of everything. Just copying the clip there. And then, without thinking about it too much, I just make quick variations. So for example, this is the kick track. Just, a very, very simple variation. And on the third one, maybe we do a... There we go. And I'm going to do the same very quickly for the hats and the toms. So I'm literally just going about it and changing the position of some of the hits, leaving the first clip untouched. So let's do this.
It's always kind of keeping the original groove that you set out. You've always kind of got that to go back to.
The first line stays always the same. So that's my master, let's say, my master groove. And then I just create very, very quick variations. There we go. Without even listening most of the time to see what happens.
Again, the happy accident again.
Exactly, yeah. Well, sometimes they're happy, but sometimes they're not. So tom low, for example, is there. Now we put it there. There we go. And maybe at the last part we put it there. There we go. So again, just have a little bit of variation. And the clave. too many toms actually already, but it's okay. Right, so we have these variations, and the first thing that I like to do is to use, again, a little bit of randomness. And Ableton, I'm not sure if other programs have that. I don't think so, because I've only seen this in Ableton. But what you can do, you can select all of the clips together, and then basically we can use the launching. So basically we tell Ableton to constantly change the clip for us. So what this does, it kind of simulates the idea, the concept of working with a real drummer or with a real percussionist, because when we're jamming with someone in a band, they will be, if we ask somebody to keep steady on a beat or on a riff or something, the chances are that they're going to variate. They're not robots playing always the same thing. And by listening to those variations, sometimes we can be inspired of doing different bass lines or write something different. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm telling Ableton, with the clip launch, to run you see, you can, in this bottom part there to the left, you can say that every 2 bars, I want Ableton to switch to any other clip, and the final part is the percentage. So what happens now that I press play, and you can see that some of the clips are blinking, because that means that every 2 bars, Ableton now will randomly launch different clips. So as I'm talking to you, or as I'm jamming, maybe setting up a synthesizer or a melody or something, this is already variation. This is already not anymore a 2-bar loop, but it's already, Ableton is creating an infinite amount of possibilities. And I often leave that happening on the Midi or on audio, not just on drums actually. Even when I write a bass line or something, I create a few variations and have Ableton launching them. And the cool thing about that is that then we can actually record that movement. So in order to do that, to be effective, the best way is to change color of the clips, because if we leave them all the same color, we won't know what clip is playing basically. But what I can do is, if I wanted to work in the arrangement view, like stretching some sounds or anything, I could just press record here, and we can have a look. And Ableton is now switching the clips, and we can see the switches here. Now in this very moment we don't see them because they're all blue, so it would be very difficult to understand what's going on. But if we change color, then we can say, all right, for the intro, maybe that cone guide's too heavy or not enough. So to use that, it's important to change the colors immediately, otherwise it's going to be very long later on to find out what's going on. So this, again, it's a little bit of randomization and a little bit of help, I suppose, already from drums,
I really like the idea, though. You were saying it's kind of, you don't get a static beat. You just kind of, you're constantly letting it evolve. There'll be sections which you probably don't like. You think, I don't like it, I'll remove it. But you like you're saying, with the sort of colour in the different sections, you're probably easily able to say, that's my intro, that's my drop, or whatever.
Exactly, that works well. And another thing that kind of comes from my passion for synthesizers and modulars, the scary world of modular synthesizers, is that we can try to inject a little bit of modulation within the drum sound. So as you know, being a fellow nerd, one good thing about having drum machines or modulars is that you can use LFOs to change sounds. So an LFO, as most of us, I suppose, know, it's a constant variation that we can apply to something, to a filter, to a pitch. So another thing that why I like to use drum racks in Ableton, there are many ways of writing drums, is the fact that you can see that per every sound that we have here, say for example, if I solo the hats, if I have a look at the actual sound, we can edit them, we can tune them, which is obviously very important to tune the drums with our melody or with our bass line, but that we will have to do later because now we don't have a melody, we don't have a key. But together with a lot of options about making the sounds longer or shorter or filtering, we also have actually one LFO available per sound, which is a little bit like a nice, good modular drum kit or drum machine. Therefore, for example, if I solo the closed hat here, I can go in the LFO page, turn it on, and then I can apply it if I want to the pitch. Now I'm going to exaggerate it so we can hear it. And now, if I change I'm now changing the speed of the LFO to hear it. So basically, what this means is that I can have something that constantly variates in time, and assigning it to the pitch, not to this extent, a bit less percentage. But basically, we can kind of replicate analog sound, because one thing that a lot of producers love about analog anything, analog synths, analog drum machines, analog anything, is the fact that it's not perfect. Especially using old 909s or 808. The kings and queens of drum machines. One reason why we love them is that if we could analyze every hit, every clap, every snare, every hi-hat, it's always a little bit different. And the reason is because they are, there is electricity that runs into that, and the electricity goes in cycles, and cycles are not perfect. And the imperfections of those machines or those synthesizers are why a lot of people love them. And so by using an LFO, again, I'm doing it in drum racks, but I'm sure you can do it in Logic, in the drum machine in Logic or in Cubase. Basically using an LFO to modulate a little bit of the pitch, we can kind of simulate the imperfection of analog. So in this case, what I would do, for example, on the closed hat, I would select a random LFO shape. And now you can hear, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but every single hit of the hi-hat is different now. It changes, it goes up and down. So now, without going 100%, but if I do around 10%, it's not much difference, but if we listen to it, if we put attention, we can hear the different pitch. And if you think about doing this for every single drum sound, I don't do it on kicks because kicks are, they're supposed to be in tune with the bass line and everything. So that.
Yeah, you try and keep that energy really there with that.
Yeah, with kicks it's a bit dangerous because by changing the pitch, we change the frequency, and then mixing would become even more of a headache. But for hi-hats, claps, and snares, and all that, I actually do this all the time. I do apply LFOs. Now, I'm not going to do it, otherwise it'll take me the whole 45 minutes to do it. So this is another kind of randomization that we can do. And again, it's very, very simple. We just turn on an LFO, assign it to the pitch. Some people assign it also to the volume, so you also have different hits, but that I'd rather do with using Midi or stuff like that. But again, LFO and clip launch, and already we have a beat which evolves. I can be now working on something else, and this is an evolution. And this can be done also in audio. So I could load a percussion loop and then create a couple of variations, and then again have Ableton launching them for me. So this, in my opinion, is a useful technique.
So yeah, so we got sort of like the variation in the beat then. So what was your sort of next step really when you're starting to get a sort of a little bit more of a, I don't want to say natural because obviously it's sort of electronic music, but once you're kind of getting more of that record kind of sound, what would be your next sort of step from here then?
That's when normally I get bored and I go to the pub. After you do this, do a few drum beats, then I normally get a bit bored. And so to fight boredom, sometimes I have an idea. So I actually have an idea and I write a melody or something. Some other times I use several devices to generate ideas. For example, one device that I use often is the audio to Midi, which a lot of softwares have. I'm sure that Cubase has it. Pretty much all of them have it. And that was a very revolutionary thing when it came out a few years ago, because it's very useful. Basically, the program analyzes whatever audio we put into it, being a full song, so a harmony, or being a melody. And basically, it kind of tries to guess the MIDI of it. It tries to write what that melody is. And I think it was officially invented to, not officially invented, but it's very useful when we're doing a remix or where we sampling something and maybe not everyone has studied music, and maybe we don't know what scale they're using or what key they're using. Therefore, it's useful to see, to have the computer tell us, and then once we see the notes on the MIDI, then we can kind of say, oh, okay, the sample I'm using is in G, so I'm going to write something in G. So that is useful for that, but I know I personally use this a lot to mumble, to sing something to my computer, and then that becomes a melody or a bass line or something like that.
So, okay, so we've sort of got drums covered then. So, for example, to get that sort of initial sample in, do you sometimes drag, I don't know, like a one-shot hit or something like that, and then start from there, and then sort of before you even know what key you're in, you're just kind of trying to sort of make a musical element appear?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, sometimes I use one of the synths I have, and I just spend some time dialing a sound. So not really worrying about a melody at all, not really worrying about it, but just making a good sound, and then taking it from there. In this case, because we're only in the box, what I would do is I would get, I don't have many samples here. I would get a loop or a stab or something. Yeah. Oh, I can put the volume a bit higher. Yeah. Let's see. Right. For example, this one has a nice tone to it. But I wouldn't use it as a loop, you know, I would use it just as a generator. So again, what I do very, very quickly, first I play it to see. Okay, the second note is quite powerful. So what I would do is I would just take the second note of it. There we go. And the first thing I do is I crop it, which means I make basically I isolate the part of the sample, which I find interesting. There we go. So now we only have this. Actually, let me work the starting points a little bit. There we go. And I crop it again. So, for example, from here, it's a very nice stabby Jupiter sound. We could put it into a sampler and write something, or we could take several portions of it and create a background like a drone. So by looping it, and then creating a couple of copies and looping several parts. Maybe the end.
So you're literally just moving the loop brace around within that particular clip, so then you can kind of start getting variation within that just one part of the sound, rather than a sort of melody as such.
Yeah, I mean, more than variations, I look for a part that could work as a drone. So maybe the very beginning of that stub is very hard. You know, we have a lot of attack. Whereas we can already see that, for example, this end part is a little bit more gentle, if you will. Or we can try even to reverse it maybe and see if that becomes a little bit more interesting. Pretty much the same. But yeah, so I would start like that, add a little bit of ambience to it. So it could be just, for now, just a very, very simple reverb. There we go. Maybe a little bit of filtering. And to make it a little bit more rhythmical, if you will, the magic of sidechaining, so a little bit of sidechaining with the kick, just so that pad doesn't really, you know.
So yeah, I mean, obviously most people are aware of it. So basically, you're triggering the sidechain compression from what, the kick drum or drums or other sounds, or I mean, how do you normally use that?
So basically, whenever the kick hits, there is a compressor that brings down the volume on the pad. So you see, we can hear it that every time, if I exaggerate it a little bit, every time the kick is hitting, the pad goes down.
That sort of pumping effect, which is great on cymbals and things like that as well, isn't it? You know,
it's great on white noises. You know, it's really great. It creates space basically. So now we have a little bit of a background. I could try different parts. I think this one is a nice one. The third one is quite backgroundy. And then, I mean, from here, we could, another technique that I like to use, as I was saying, is the melody to Midi. So in this case, instead of I spare you me singing to my computer, I will load an a cappella, some house a cappella, let's see.
You got me horny in the morning. You got me.
Don't you hear me calling you Miss Honey?
These are old school a cappellas from the 80s or the 90s. And sometimes I load something like this, which is completely out of context within this song. And then I let Ableton analyze it and see what happens. First of all, I'm trying to put it, it's going to be difficult with this one, but try to put it in the same key. In this case, we have the pad, which is in, what is it? C, the Jupiter pad. So let's see.
Don't you hear me calling you Miss Honey? I know you hear me calling you Miss.
Well, let's say that it's in key. I don't really hear a key there. But what I'll do is I'll just select the first part of the a cappella. Again, crop the clip to make it. No, that didn't work. Sorry, I have to loop it first and then crop the clip. There we go.
Don't you hear me?
And then I will right-click and tell Ableton to convert melody to MIDI track. So convert harmony to MIDI track works really well with complex material, and convert melody with anything like voice or guitar solos or synth solos. So I do that. It's always quite funny to see what Ableton comes up with, because it's sometimes it's not quite right. And then I immediately remove the instrument that Ableton opens for that, because it's a terribly sounding piano. I don't think it's very exciting. So I'd rather put immediately something like the Moog or the Jupiter. Let's have a look. Yeah, I suppose the Moog. We keep it safe. So Let's solo. Oh, again, it's quite gigantic. Let's solo the a cappella and the Midi.
Don't you hear me calling you Miss Honey? I know you hear me calling you Miss Honey.
More or less, we're there. More or less. But, you know, again, this is randomly generated, so let's see if, you know, maybe it could become something. Well, first of all, I'm going to try to fix the tempo a little bit. Let's switch off the Moog. So it starts there. I'm going to take everything and put it there. And then just quantize. Let's see. All right, let's loop the first part maybe. Let's see. Maybe loading a bass sound. And then I'm gonna bring down the octave of all of this mess of notes and I'm gonna mute some of them. Let's see this one maybe. Again, not the greatest bass line in the world, but we started with a complete random a cappella, and this could become something. You know, I could have a look at what notes it's doing. So it's starting in E and ends down to A. It's completely wrong from all sorts of musical point of views, but it could be a good starting point to build something. So again, melody to MIDI or harmony to MIDI is a kind of, again, a way of using the computer to help us generating. Sometimes it's good, some other times it's a bit weird, like in this case. Another thing that I like to do is to program, try to write melodies or bass lines using a very, very old school technique, which is the technique of sequencers. So again, for those nerds that have modulars, we are very familiar with sequencers. They are the boxes which normally are at the bottom or on the top, or some people have 10 or 15 different sequencers. And they were the first original way of controlling synthesizers. Before synthesizers had keyboards, at the beginning synthesizers didn't have any keyboards because they were supposed to make, you know, outer space sounds and experimental stuff. And then, thank God, Mr. Moog in the 60s decided that they could be used to be played like normal instruments. But before that, sequencers were these boxes where every knob basically sends a note. Note on, note off, first of all. And then also, you know, actually pitch of notes. Now, there are many sequencers out there in nature, in analog or Arturia, like there are lots of them, and a lot of synthesizers have their own sequencers as well. For a while I was looking for software alternatives, and so far I've only found Reactor has some good sequencer, Native Instrument Reactor. And then I was looking for one that I could use within Ableton. And Ableton has this program called Max for Live, which is kind of like Reactor. It's a language that basically smart people can write things for. So you could write literally a delay or a pedal or whatever, a drum machine. And I found this very smart Japanese guy that spent quite some time, and he created 5 sequencers, modeling them on real sequencers that that exist out there. And one of them is called the Dark Sequencer. It's made by Dope Fair, and this Japanese guy made a copy of it within Max for Live. So I'm gonna load it, and I use this very, very often, especially sometimes to start something, some other times when I know a key. For example, I'm gonna switch off that terrible bass line that we just had, and I'm gonna go back to this. So this, we have a key, and sometimes, we try to write something under that key. I know that that's a C. I can play a little bit keyboard. I'm not great, but I can play a little bit, and I would try a bass line or a melody, and nothing comes. So that's when I fire up a sequencer. So you can see here, this sequencer is basically, the knobs send note on, note off. If I load a plugin, let's say, I like to do it on the Jupiter personally, in the plugin world. Let's see, where is it? Jupy, there we go. So first I make, it's really huge. I look for a sound. There is one, this ARP, I really like this sound. I'm just gonna quickly make it shorter. Right, so once I dial a sound with either a real synth or a plugin, then the sequencer starts immediately when we press play. So I'm gonna solo the Jupiter for a sec, and I press play. And now what happens is that the sequencer is sending a note on, so all the notes are on, and it's sending a C. So this, the advantage of using this compared to the original one is that this obviously doesn't need cables or electricity or anything, can be saved within a session, and also has scales and notes, just like Push or some other Novation products where you can play with scales, even not being good. You can pretend that you're really good at soloing and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really, things like the Launchpad, for example, where you can load up your own scales. It makes it a lot easier. I mean, I'm not a keys player. I'm sort of, the only instrument I can play really is a guitar very badly. So yeah, I think it's really useful sometimes being able to sort of make sure you're in a key and you know that whatever the lit up pads I hit, it's going to be in tune. And again, just speeding up that workflow and sort of keeping, because it can be quite depressing when you can't get what you want out of a synth or something. So that's a really useful point. Thanks.
Definitely. So yeah, this does the same. So we can select. You can see at the moment. It's doing, it's playing C, and if I don't select any scales, it works chromatically. So by moving the knobs, it's going up of one semitone, one keyboard note at a time. And I mean, you can come up with something good with it, but suddenly it's Berghain at 10 a.m. Suddenly it's techno. You just need this then. Really. So you can do it without scales. It works, but it's a bit nicer to use scales. So what I would do, you can see here, we have all of these possibilities, and they all have a different color, just like modes for guitar or for piano. We can use different modes for different moods. I'm a fan of the Pentatonic Scale, first of all, because it's the easiest to learn on the piano or the guitar, and also because it's a sound that, in my opinion, works really well with dance music. So we have major and minor. Minor pentatonic works very well for me. So now I'm going to reset everything there. He's not resetting them. It's kind of crashed. Oh, there we go. Now you see we're back to just C, but now wherever I'm gonna put our knobs, it's gonna be a scale. So again, I'm not sure exactly what, I don't know what I'm doing consciously. I know that I'm keeping it within the key, which is important. And then I just dial something and I try a few, and then we don't necessarily have to use 16s. We might not want to be like Tangerine Dream. We might want to use it a little bit sparingly. So I might just mute some of the hits here, again, without thinking about too much.
And obviously, would you sort of record the MIDI of this as well to be able to use with other synths?
Yeah, so if I leave it as it is, it's nice, but then if I want to make variation, it would be very long. I would have to go and tweak it. So with a lot of MIDI things in Ableton, I like the fact that you can record the actual MIDI into another track, therefore being able to tweak it. So what I'll do is I'll just open a new MIDI track, and as an input, I would put the Jupiter track. There we go. And now I can just record a couple of bars. So now here we go. Now we have a clip here where we have all the MIDI information of the sequencer. So I can move the MIDI clip to the Jupiter, to the track. Delete that.
As an example, like you were saying, it's sort of hitting a creative block, like you were with the bass line, maybe the a cappella conversion wasn't as good. So you could really use those MIDI notes on that bass sound as well, I guess, and start sort of making a bass line that will actually really mirror it. You were showing us that as well?
Yeah, of course. You layer things together. So, for example, now in this case, we have the MIDI here. I could already make a little variation. For example, I don't know, I take a note and I put it, 2 octaves higher. You can swing them, you can change them. And then, as you say, I can use this. Now that I have something vaguely interesting, I can copy it into the move. And we start creating layers. So starting from a completely random melody, then we can go there, and obviously I would change the I would change probably the pitch in the Moog, so it becomes a bass line, and then it doesn't have to mirror it entirely. We can put notes on, notes off, and and this way we have nice layers there. Then we could try again to use the a cappella, but
Don't you hear me calling you, Miss?
no, the a cappella was a bad idea. But it was to show you, what I can. But yeah, so I mean, these are, the clip launch, the LFOs, melody to MIDI, sequencer are all, techniques which exist for quite some time. But I find them very useful because I do hit blocks. When we sit in the studio all day long, every day, sometimes I'm sure it happens to all of us. Sometimes things are very, very, very quickly, and when we make a song and the excitement stays there. Some other times we maybe start with, we have to do a remix or something, and we have an a cappella for the original track or something, and then we don't know what to build around it. And so having, as we were doing this together, the drums kept changing. The drums kept being, it kept moving, and that kind of keeps me a little bit more interested. And if you think that I would then do variations of the melody and the bass line, and also put them in clips and have Ableton launch that as well, basically we keep having, we use the computer as an assistant really to switch things for us. And then eventually record it, and then in the arrangement view be a little bit more precise and do the arrangement properly and variations and automations and all that.
It was really interesting. I mean, I love the idea of sort of being able to just capture the MIDI like that. I mean, we were discussing this leading up to BMC, and you were sort of saying about the peak synth, for an example. Like you might be on the move, and you're working while you're traveling, things like that. But then when you get back to the studio, you could easily kind of start working with the other sort of hardware synths. Or again, I'm no player, so it's nice to kind of create ideas when it comes to you. But then actually, when you get to the studio, you're able to then kind of realize those ideas and actually start getting more in depth with other synths. I mean, that's really nice way of doing it. So what's next then? So you kind of start getting a bit of an arrangement together now from here, or?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would. Normally, I try not to arrange. It's quite easy to start arranging a little too early, I think, because we're a little bit in a rush. I mean, I am always in a rush, and I'm always thinking, okay, that's enough, and I want to try to arrange it. And for some people, it works, to have like a scheme to move into the arrangement part, and then start, working in blocks, as in, copy 8 bars, 16 bars, and go about that. To me, what I try to do is I use a controller, either the Novation when I'm traveling or Push or whatever, and I try to have everything for the song ready as when I'm jamming. So when I have enough parts, then I spend a couple of hours jamming and launching things and imagining the structure in my head, and then I record the arrangement live, and then afterwards I would edit it. And as you're saying, this is kind of the setup that I have when I'm on the road. But when I'm in studio, the way I work is it's the same way, as in like I use a lot of randomness, but I work a lot with audio. I'm not a fan of I'm not a fan of MIDI, but I'd rather record things as quickly as possible in audio because we commit to something. When we have, you were saying before, with presets, when we have something like Peak, which I really love, it sounds really great, and it has a lot of presets. It's easy to write a part, and then we commit to it, and then 2 hours later, maybe we got bored of it because we've been listening to it for a while, and then we might think, oh, I'm gonna change the preset, and then that might take us, somewhere else, and then we never finish the track, or we start 7 different tracks in the same project, which is also quite common. So what I do, even with Peak, or I have also the Matrix Brute synthesizers, which have presets, I very rarely use any. I actually dial a sound for that song, and then as quickly as possible I record it, and so it's committed, it's an audio. And sometimes I'm very enthusiastic about something, and then I listen to it again and it's not really working, but at least we have the audio, and then it's very easy to go into it and use it as put that audio into a sampler, for example, and play around with it. And then it's kind of the idea of sampling ourselves in a way. So when I have entire days where all I do is I have all of my synths plugged. I have a big system using converters, so I've got 24 inputs in my computer at any time. And I'm using 22 out of 24 at the moment. So all of my machines, all of my pedals are all plugged in, all MIDI ready to go. So if I press play on the computer, they all start making noise. And then I record everything all the time. So I have 2-3 days of jamming. And then I realize I actually have to finish something. And then I go into those long jams and I find, oh, that was a nice sequence, that was a nice something. And then I take them in audio and then maybe start a different project with it. So it's basically like constantly sampling ourselves. I personally at the moment I'm working that way, as opposed to I'm making something for that project and stays there,
I mean, I think one of the things that's quite interesting, the idea of capturing that sort of one note and then effectively making something from that. I mean, do you use, I think you were telling me you use Impulse and things like that. That's correct.
absolutely. I use another thing I like to do. I can show very quickly is I like to use Impulse, which is a drum sampler, and I like to use it as a as not a drum sampler, as a like a percussive weird sequencer. So what I do is I feed something in it. So let me just quickly do it. I have a Midi track there. Loading Impulse, where it is. It's here. So you see, it has these slots, and it's a very, very basic sampler, very, very good for drums. But what I would do is I would feed, for example, the note that we had before, that synth that we had before. I would copy it a few times within the Impulse. Let's say 5 times. The drum and bass wave there is quite, I'm enjoying that. And then, whoa. Yeah, hello. So now what we have, you can see that in every little slot of Impulse we have the same sample that we've used before to make the drone. And what I do is I just create quickly variation using the filter. So this is the first slot, for example. I turn on the filter, bang up the resonance, maybe close it and make the decay a little bit shorter. And then I go about the second one and I do the same. I turn on the filter, different frequency though, maybe something a bit closer and a bit longer. And I'll do the same for all of them. I try to remember what the settings are per every slot, but my memory doesn't work like that. So I'm just basically going a little bit by sound. Some of them are longer, some of them are shorter. And then the final one, you can make it really open. Right. So we see that from one step, one little note from the sample library, or it could be me recording or whatever, we now have these slots, which is almost like having a synthesizer with a nice sample and hold, for example, or a nice LFO again, but we've basically done it manually. And then,
Don't you hear?
oh my God, I'm gonna delete the acapella, there you go. And then we have a MIDI track there, and I'm gonna write, without listening, I'm gonna write some of the slots there. Let's see. So again, I really love to use Impulse for that. It's very, very quick. Basically, we copy anything into those slots, and then anything. It works very well with vocals, for example, and just by using different resonances. But we can randomize it even more, because per every cell we have a. I can't see with such a resolution here, but we have the randomization here. You can see this little percentage there, and it applies to resonance. So if I also add a bit of randomization on the resonance of some of the cells, not all of them, it also starts varying randomly even more. I can change the starting point of the sound. I can add, for some slots, I can add a little bit of drive, which makes it stand out, almost like an accent. So you see, we're basically using a drum sampler, and it becomes a sequencer to all effects, where the drive becomes the accent, and the filter and resonance almost become notes, and then also we can change officially. We can change the notes of some of them. So this slot here, I can say transpose it, I don't know, a third, a fifth. Something like that. So again, sometimes when I'm working with for a remix or something, and I don't really like the parts, I take the parts, whatever that is, any type of sound, vocal or anything, put them into Impulse, and they become part of the rhythm. So again, a very, very quick tool, which I'm using a lot actually when I'm writing. Yeah.
No, I just love the fact that, in this short session, we really just literally got the Focusrite sound card here, and obviously some foldback with the speakers, but yeah, and a great acapella. But we've really sort of created something which is, almost ready to sort of take on to that next stage. And I think it's really interesting to sort of show that you don't necessarily need to have lots of other pieces of equipment to get a real kind of dancehall ready setup. I really love that we sort of started with nothing, and within moments we've kind of got a track that's just sort of started to really form. So yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks very much. Is there anything else you sort of want to add, or you? What's your sort of next sort of tip really from here, sort of taking it further? What would be sort of a processing tip or something you'd like to share?
Open a good bottle of red and then arrange it and then come back to it the next day, and if you still like it, then it's a song. I really these days I try to keep to make a song within a couple of sessions, so there will be a lot of writing and then the arrangement, and then I leave it there, and then the next day or whenever I'm back in the studio, I would listen to it and then mix it. And then of course there is a lot to do with mixing and the engineering part. Some producers love the engineering part as well. Some others like to use engineers to finish their tracks, to each their own. But yeah, really, after all these years of trying different techniques, buying a lot of stuff, thinking, the more things I have, the more creative I am. I mean, what you were saying about the gear is true at the moment, where we have a basic idea all in the box, but obviously I love to have little things like, drum machines or the circuit or whatever lying there, because also the idea of touching something, it could be very inspiring. So I'm all up for buying stuff all the time. But I think that if we limit ourselves, for example, sometimes I set up a session where I say, I'm only going to use that synth and those guitar pedals. So even though I could potentially use everything else, I try to keep only in that. And it's amazing I know it's a famous thing, but it's amazing what we can do when we really limit ourselves and maybe set even a time. Like, I'm going to write in 3 hours, see what comes up. And with using a little bit of clever, methods in the software, it could become really quick, I think. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for sharing some of this with the people attending the seminar. We really thank you for coming down. So thank you very much.